In this video, I'll look at viewport navigation and selecting objects in 3ds Max. When we start out in 3ds Max, the main part of the screen is taken up by the viewports. Right now I'm in a 4-view configuration, with my perspective view in the bottom right being the active view, as shown by the dull yellow border around it. My other viewports are named by their viewport labels in the top left: perspective, left, top, and front. Above the viewports then is the main toolbar and the graphite modeling tools, which right now are just rolled up to their names. There's a Max icon taking the place of the traditional File menu, and next to it are New, Open, Save, Undo, and Redo. To the right then is our Command panel, and we'll do a lot here when we're selecting and modifying objects. On the bottom is our timeline, and we'll use this when we get to animating objects and moving our cameras around. Below the timeline here, we've got keyframes, messages, a script listener in the bottom left, and our viewport navigation in the bottom right. Typically what I'll do is click in a view and press Alt-W so I work full screen. Alternately, on the absolute bottom right in the viewport, we have the Maximize Viewport toggle, and this lets us toggle back and forth between one view and multiple views. In 3ds Max 2013, we've introduced a quick way to add in viewport layouts. For example, I can choose two side by side, and I can always move the proportion of these around by clicking and dragging on the middle border to resize the views as I need. Typically, I'll work in one big view, so I can really zoom in and see what I'm doing and not have to crane my neck in. I'll start out by opening a file for an example, clicking on the File Open button, and I'll choose in here Building 3. This is one of the buildings I created for our city, and it's in another file, but it's a good working example. What we can see here is that I've modeled this building and worked in one big view. I saved the scene in the top view in realistic shading. In any view, if you hold Alt and click the mouse wheel in, it spins around to an orthographic view, with the exception of perspective. Pressing P takes you to a perspective view. U takes you back to an orthographic. And the difference in these is that the orthographic is a drawn isometric view, whereas a perspective is a drawn two-point perspective, not a camera view. Camera views are something separate entirely. To switch around your views, press T for top, L for left, B for bottom. You can also press V and it takes you to a viewports menu wherever the mouse is. And there's my other views. For example, the back view. Or here's the right view. We can add these to our hotkeys if we like, but I find this works pretty nicely. I'll press Z to zoom extents, and that zooms extents either on the selected objects or, with nothing selected, everything in the scene. My biggest advice in 3ds Max is to zoom in and work big. It pains me to see people working like this, trying to find an object, click on it, and move it around, when their building is a tiny blip on the screen. Zoom in close so you can really see what you're doing. Your eyes and your neck will thank you for it later. We can change around how our view displays as well. Right now I'm working in a realistic mode, and since I don't have any lights in here, there are default lights in the scene that are casting these shadows. I'll click on the viewport label where it says realistic, and under here we can see under lighting and shadows I'm illuminating with the scene lights, which switching to illuminate with default lights doesn't do anything. As I said, there's no lights in the scene. We can make a choice here then to show our lighting or simply tone things, depending on what we need to see. We can also choose shadows and ambient occlusion, and this is powered by the nitrous viewports here in 3ds Max, taking advantage of the power of the graphics cards we have available these days and DirectX. I can switch around the views if I need. For example, a shaded view isn't going to shadow, but will light decently, and may provide me a better way of seeing what I need to. I can also choose, instead of shaded, consistent colors, which gives me a flat colored model and the option to shadow if I'd like. This may let me see my geometry better depending on how I'm working and what I'm modeling. We have our stylized views available as well. For example, under stylized, here's graphite, displaying this as if it was drawn with graphite, with hard edges. If we need more of a technical rendering or something similar, it provides a quick way to do that. We've got other modes available: acrylic, ink, color, and so forth. we can, if we'd like, work in a clay. And I find this is very handy when I'm working in modeling an object. When seeing it in a uniform tone clay render gives me a better appreciation of the contours of the model to let me see if I'm putting the detail in the right place. My best advice is to switch around the view as you need. Make sure you zoom in, see what you're working on, and configure the way it shades to best suit what you're doing at the time. If you're lighting, switch to realistic and use the scene lights. You're going to hit a limit depending on your graphics card, but it's pretty good for showing where things are lit up. Sometimes I'll also press F3 to switch back to a wireframe so I can see through the object. F3 again takes me back to realistic. If I'm in a shaded view, for example, and I press Shift F3, it'll take me to realistic. F4 turns on edged faces, so I can see the geometry lines as well as the shading, and this is useful in some places. Now that we've got a good idea of at least how to change around what we're seeing and basic navigation, we can get in and select some objects. To start, I'll scroll the mouse wheel back to zoom out. I can pan by clicking it in and dragging, and holding Alt and the mouse wheel orbits around. To select an object then, simply click on it. We can see that the roof, for example, is selected because its wireframe is white and there are selection brackets just outside the mesh. Pressing F3 to go to a wireframe just shows the white wireframe on the geometry. We can select multiple objects by holding Control and clicking on them. We can deselect an object by holding Alt and clicking on it. That way we can add to a selection easily. 3ds Max also defaults to a window selection, meaning if I click and drag a window around objects, objects will have to be entirely within that window to be selected. The towers on the side of the building were not inside the window, hence they were not selected, but these balconies and doors were. If you'd like to switch, there's a window crossing toggle up at the top. Switching that over to crossing means that if the marquee or the selection simply crosses an object, it will select it. You can work in any way you'd like. Personally, a lot of times I work in window because it means I have to be very deliberate about what I'm selecting. If you'd like to change how your selection region looks, right next to the window crossing toggle are some different options: rectangular, circular, polygonal lasso, freeform, and paint. For example, a lasso selection lets me quickly lasso in objects if I have an irregular selection. Coming back to the beginning shows a plus there where the mouse is and closes that selection, lassoing around those objects. Every object in 3ds Max has a name. Clicking on the roof, for example, shows it's called Box 004. Over here in the Name and Color rollout on the Create tab. Going to the Modifier panel, the bent blue tube, again shows the object's name and its wireframe color. Right now it's gray because I've got a metal panel material on it. It also shows that this object is an editable poly, and that's all it is for the moment. There's my editable poly tools available, and it's ready to manipulate. With multiple objects selected, we'll see up in the top here in the name field, 2 objects selected, meaning that I have 2 objects selected that don't have the same properties, although I can modify them together if I need. With a good handle on our viewports and selection then, we're ready to get in and start moving things, scaling and rotating, and building up our city. Remember, zoom in, get in big on what you want to see, and move around so you can see it full in the view. Work big and be fluid with the mouse. It's okay to really move that view around to get to what you need.